Hello, kids. I'm your mom, Shanti. So welcome back to our mathematics class for grade 4. We are now in our second quarter. So for this week, I will discuss about visualizing decimal numbers using models and renaming decimal numbers to fractions. So last week, we discussed about fractions, right? But for this week and for the next following weeks, we will be discussing about or you will learn about decimal numbers. So let's think of decimals like money. So we use decimals every day while dealing with money, weight, length, etc. So decimal numbers are used in situations where more precision is required than the whole number can provide. For example, when we calculate our weight on the weighing machine, we do not always find the weight equal to a whole number on the scale, right? So that's where decimal numbers will enter. So we use decimal numbers in some situations wherein we cannot represent it in a whole number. Okay, but before we proceed to our lesson this week, let's review first our previous lesson. What are the steps in solving word problems involving fractions? Can you still remember, class? Okay, so here's how we can solve problems involving fractions. First, we must understand the problem, know what's asked in the problem, know the given facts. Second is to plan, determine the operation to be used, then write the number sentence. Third is to solve, show the solution to the problem. And fourth, check and look back. Check if your answer is reasonable and state a complete answer. So in math, we use the shortcut agonsa in solving word problems. So always remember A stands for what is asked, G for given, O for operation, N for number sentence, S for your solution, and A for your answer or complete answer. So I hope you still remember how to solve word problems involving fractions. So we are done with that topic. Let's proceed to decimal numbers. So let us start visualizing decimal numbers using models and know how to rename decimal numbers to fractions or vice versa. For now, let us discuss what is a decimal number. So a decimal number can be defined as a number whose whole number part and the fractional part separated by a decimal point. It is a number that names a whole quantity or a fractional part. The dot in a decimal number is called a decimal point. The digits following the decimal point show a value smaller than 1. Okay, so as you can see here, class, we have here decimal numbers. So this is the decimal point that we are referring to. As you can see, digits following the decimal point show a value smaller than 1. So as you can still remember, these are our whole numbers, right? With base value of ones, then tens. However, after the decimal point, so this value is smaller than 1. So we will know later what is the place value of that digit. So here is a place value chart. So we have here the decimal point there. We have here 317 as our whole number. 7 for the ones digit or ones place value. For the tens place value, we have the 1 here, then 3 for the hundreds place value. However, after the decimal point, the place value is tens. Okay? And then, following is the hundreds, then the thousands. So always remember that after the decimal point, the place value of that digit is tenths, okay? Tenths, that's the spelling. T-E-N-T-H-S. Then the next digit is hundreds, okay? So here is the expanded form of the numbers here. We have the 300 plus 10 plus 7 plus 2 tenths and 9 hundredths. That's how we read it. All in all, it's 317 and 29 hundredths. That's how we read that number. Okay, let's write here a number. Okay, we write 3 after the decimal point. So how do we read that number? So, it is read, or kung basahon tayo na siya, it will be 3 tenths. Do you understand? How about this one? Okay, how do you read that? Okay, we read it as 4. What is the place value here? Hundreds. So we read it as 4 hundredths. Again, 4 hundredths. Okay, now, how do we visualize decimal numbers? What are the models that we have to use? So let us discuss first some important concepts. The number that has a dot after the ones digit is called decimal numbers. These digits after the ones denoted tenths, hundredths, and so on. So these are the numbers after the whole number. Those are what we call the decimal numbers. Do you understand, class? So decimal number can be changed or renamed into fraction form and vice versa, from decimal to fraction or from fraction to decimal. So after going through this lesson, you are expected to visualize decimal numbers using models. What models should be used? like blocks, grids, number lines, and money to show the relationship to fraction. You are also expected to rename decimal numbers to fractions whose denominator are factors of 10 and 100 to decimals. Okay, now, let us look at the blocks and cubes model below. Observe how the 10 cubes represent the decimal numbers and fractions. So we have here the cubes, right? How many cubes do we have here? 10. So the 10 cubes represent the whole. 6 out of 10 cubes are shaded cubes. So only 6 cubes are shaded. So this can be written as 6/10 in a fraction form, or 6/10 in decimal form. Always remember to refer to the place value chart we have discussed earlier. Okay? The denominator has 1 0. It tells you that there is one digit after the decimal point in the decimal number. So every time that we use only one digit here after the decimal point, automatically what you should use as a denominator, if you want to rename it into a fraction, you should use the 10, the tens. Okay? Because we have to refer to the place value chart we used earlier. So that's how we represent decimal using cubes. Okay? So if we shade only 5 parts of the whole cube, what would it be? So if we shade only the 6, or I mean the 5, so in fraction form, 5 out of 10, right? So it means our decimal point will be, or our decimal number will be 5/10. So I hope you now understand how to visualize it using cubes. Now let's proceed to the next model. Grid is another way to visualize decimal numbers. You can observe that there are 100 squares. This means the whole is equally divided into 100 squares. So let's always remember that when we want to visualize, in 1 peso, there are 10 cents, right? However, if you want to accumulate 1 peso using 1 cent only, you need to have 100 cents. That's why here we use 100 or 100, the hundreds grid, so that you can visualize how decimal is related to whole number. Because in one whole, you need 100 of this if we use grid. However, if we use cube, we only need 10. Okay? So grid is another way to visualize decimal numbers. You can observe that there are 100 squares. This means the whole is equally divided into 100 squares. So here, there are 12 shaded out of 100 squares. You can shade it from here to there. But however, in this example, we shaded it apart from each other. So only 12 are shaded. So we have to write, that's the fraction. The fraction part of it is 12 hundredths. Because in 100, the whole is divided into 100 squares, right? So only 12 are shaded. So it will be written into 12 hundredths. And when written into decimal form, because we are using already the hundredths as the base value, so we also use 2 digits here. So we read it as 12 hundredths in decimal form. So you will notice that 12 has 2 decimal places. So always remember, kids, that once your decimal number reach 2 digit, so automatically your denominator, you should use 100 as your denominator. Okay? So the next model that we will use is by the use of number line. So decimal number can also be visualized through number line. So there are 10 poles, which represents a whole. So out of 10 poles, there are 3 painted poles. So out of the 10 poles, only 3. So let's have a correction here. It should only be 3. Okay, so only 3 poles were shaded with red. Okay, so this can be written in decimal form as 3/10. So 1 digit only. So we use the denominator 10/10. So in fraction form, 3/10 in decimal will be written as 3/10. 3 as your numerator, then 10 as your denominator. Always remember that. So how about if we have 4 poles, 4 shaded poles? So of course, the answer will be 4 as your numerator because 4 was shaded. Then how many poles were there in all? 10. So your denominator will be 10. So 4 tenths is equivalent to what decimal number? 4 tenths. That's it. So now, here's an example of visualizing decimal by the use of money. So look at 25 centavo coin. This can be written as 0.25 in decimal form, or read it as 25 hundredths. So if we write that in fraction form, we use 25 as our numerator, then 100 will be our denominator because 25 has 2 digits already. So in fraction form, will be written as 25 over 100, or 25 hundredths. So here are other examples of decimal number to fraction form. Observe how decimal numbers rename to fraction form and vice versa. So here, class, you can see here that as we rename a decimal number into a fraction, we have also to reduce it in lowest term. So previously, we have discussed how to reduce a fraction in lowest form, right? So we have to find its LCM. You still remember? Okay, so let's have here using one decimal place only. So 5.50 cents. Or 5 tenths, I mean. So 5 tenths is equals to 1/2 because 5 and 10 can be divided by 5. We reduce it into its lowest form, which is 1/2. Then we have here 4 tenths. So 4 will be our numerator. Then the denominator will be 10 because we have one decimal place here. Always remember that when we have one decimal place here, we use 10 as our denominator, okay? So 0.4 is equals to 4 tenths. 4 is the numerator, then 10 as the denominator. So in fraction form, or in lowest term, 4 and 10 is divided by, or can be divided by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is equals to 2, and 10 divided by 2 is equals to 5. So the lowest form of 4 tenths is 2/5. Then we also have here 0.8. Its equivalent fraction, or 8 tenths. The equivalent fraction is 8 as the numerator, then 10 as the denominator, which is equals to 4/5 because 8 is still divided by 2, and same goes with 10, which can be divided by 2 also. Then we have here 0.9 or 9 tenths. So in fraction, so 9 will be your numerator here, and because it is only in one decimal place, we use the 10 as our denominator. So 9 tenths. So that's how we rename a decimal to a fraction. So how about if we are referring to 2 decimal places? So once we have 2 decimal places, so kung may duwa na ang mga digit na makita after decimal point, automatically ang inyong denominator na ganito So automatically, the denominator that you have to use is what? 100. Okay? Always remember that. So 25, 0.25 or 25 hundredths as we read it, will be written or named into 25 hundredths. So 25 as your numerator, then 100 as your denominator. So 25 and 100 can be divided by what number? Okay, it is divided or can be divided by what largest number? 25. So 25 divided by 25 is 1, and 100 divided by 25 is 4. That's why the lowest form of 25 hundredths is 1/4. Same goes with other examples here, like 50 hundredths or 0.50. We have here 50 as our numerator and 100 as our denominator. For the third example, we have here 40 hundredths. So 40 will be your numerator. Then, because there are two decimal places, we use 100 as your denominator. So 40 as your numerator, then 100 as your denominator. So we have 40 hundredths. So 40 and 100 can be divided by what number? 20. So 40 divided by 20 is 2. Then 100 divided by 20 is 5. The lowest form is 2/5. Always remember that when you rename a fraction, when you rename a decimal number into fraction form, you have to reduce it into lowest term. And we also have here 0.35 or 35 hundredths. So 35 will be your numerator, then 100 will be your denominator. So as your task, look for the lowest term of 35 hundredths. So there is still a lowest form for this. So it's up to you to discover what can divide 35 and 100. So let's go over to the models that we have used earlier. So here is an example of cube. So let us read it. Okay, how many parts were shaded? Okay, we only have 2 parts shaded. So 2 will be our numerator, right? 2. And how many parts were not shaded? Or how many parts do we have in all? We have 10. So we have here 2 tenths. So if you write it or rename it as a decimal number, we only have to write 0, decimal point, then what number? The numerator will be written here as your decimal number 2. So automatically, because 2 is in the tens place value. So there's no need for me to write 10 here. So automatically that's how you rename a fraction to a decimal number. 2 tenths is equal to 0.2. You understand, class? Okay. So whatever the numerator here above your fraction bar is what you have to write here after your decimal point. Okay? So that's how you can visualize and then rename fraction to decimal point. Okay, let's use here the hundreds grid. Okay, let's see. Okay, we are shading it now. Okay. So class, as you can see here, all in all, these squares here, the total of this is 100, okay? So your denominator, the whole, is 100. So that will be your denominator, I mean. So how many parts were shaded? Let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So only 17 parts were shaded. So we have here 17 hundredths. So that's the fraction part or the fraction form of this shaded region, which is equivalent to the decimal form or decimal number of 0 decimal point. Then what number should we write after the decimal point? Of course, your numerator will be the digit here. So 1 and 7. So 17 hundredths equals to 17 hundredths in decimal form. Do you understand now, class? So that's how easy you can visualize decimal numbers and how to rename from decimal number to fraction and from fraction to decimal number. That's how we can use the hundredths units. Okay. Now, some of you might ask this. So for example, we have here, we will shade, we will use white na lang. Oh, not the same. Okay, so let's use red. So we are shading how many portions? Oh, again. Let's start all over again. We are shading two tenths, right? Okay. So we have here 2/10. We have here 0.2. We have here 2/10. 2/10. Now let's shade here 20 squares. Okay, now we have here in this hundreds grid, we have here how many were shaded? 20, right? In the tens grid, how many were shaded? 22. In fraction form, the shaded region is 20 over what? Over 100. So as you can see, guys, even though this area here use the tens grid and this area here use the hundreds grid, you can visualize that 2/10 and 20/100 is equal, right? So in every 10, so in 1/10 grid here, we use 1/100. Okay, so 1/10 is equivalent to 10/100. You get it now? So if you have 2/10 and 20/100, if you compare it, you get an equal portion of it. You can see it here in our example of the grid. So 2/10 and 20/100 is equal. So here's another model, which is the number line here. So we have already discussed it earlier. So I am just showing it to you so that you will be familiarized with it. Or in our activities, you can use this for your answers. So let's use the number 9 here. So for example, the shaded post is 1, 2, 3. So we only have 3/10. So the decimal, when we write in decimal 0.3, and we rename it in fraction, is equal to 3 as your numerator and 10 as your denominator. Always remember that. So for more discussion and for you not to get confused about our lesson, so let's use the place value chart. Okay, class? So when we rename a decimal number to fraction decimal, to fraction. So you have here 5 tenths. In our place value chart, 5 is in the tenths place. Okay, so once you use or the number is in tens place, what we should use only as your denominator. Ang gamiton nyo nga denominator, automatically 10. Yan. Then, ang number na ginsulat ni Diraho, whatever the number you have written there, will be your numerator. Gets na? Amo mo lang na siya kadali magsulat from decimal. So, from 0.5 or from 0.5, then convert ta siya to fraction, which is 5 tenths. Kaya naman, ang iyang decimal or place value here is in the tenths place. Please remember that. Then the number that we use is 5. So 5 will be your numerator. That's why 5 tenths. So 5 and 10 can be divided by what number? It can still be reduced to lowest form or lowest term. It can be divided by 5. So 5 by 5 is 1. Then 10 divided by 5 is 2. So we have here 1. So 0.5 or 5 tenths is equivalent to 1. Amo man na siya sa kwarta. Just like money. So when we have 1 peso, if we divide it in half, we use the 50 centavo coin, right? So I hope we now understand how we can relate decimal numbers to money. So that's how we rename a decimal number to fraction. How about if we rename a fraction to decimal? Okay. Given a fraction which is 19 hundredths. Okay. So automatically class, you should write decimal number already. Decimal point, I mean. First and foremost, you should automatically write a decimal point. Then just write the numerator here. Kopyahon nyo lang ina ang numerator diri. Oh, 19. Amo lang na sa kasimple. Kung ano ang numerator nyo diri sa babaw, isulat nyo lang na siya after the decimal point. Gets yun na? So, 19 hundredths from fraction form to decimal form, muna na siya ho. 0.19 or 0.19. Gets the class? So, I hope you can now understand easily how to visualize decimal numbers and how to rename it from decimal to fraction and from fraction to decimal number. So after this discussion, you can now answer the intended activities that you have to answer for this week. Okay, but before that, reflect. Is it possible to rename a decimal number into a fraction? So what's your answer? And for following and for more information about our lesson, you may read the following pages in your Mathematics 4 Learner's Material from 134 and to 142. So these are your learning tasks for this week. Show the following decimals using grids. Write your answer in your notebook, but for your answer, just write it on your paper, okay? Again, write your answers on your paper or in a piece of paper. Learning task number 2. Show these decimal numbers using the number lines. Then the third one, use these decimal numbers using the cubes. So you have to draw or illustrate it. And then for learning task number 4, rename the following decimal form into a fraction form. Okay, still write on your paper. So in learning task number 4, decimal form to fraction. So I already discussed it earlier. And then for learning task number 5, rename the fraction into decimal form. So that's all for this week. I hope you learned a lot from me. So let's always remember that in our daily lives, mathematics is also important. So later on, kung may mga negosyo ang inyong parents, no? So decimal numbers is very important when we are dealing with money, we are measuring some length, some weight. So these are some concepts na very important sa aton daily lives. So we should not take it for granted. That's why I hope you will still get motivated to learn about these topics and answer our learning activity sheets for this week. So that's all that I can impart from you. So I hope you can finish your learning activity sheets with the help of your guardians or parents. So that's all, kids. Thank you so much for listening.